Continuing this series looking at the Marvel Studios figures from ToyBiz, today I'm going to turn my attention to what may be one of the more surprising entries in this wave. Now this line was very short-lived, it only produced about 7 figures in total. As I've mentioned in previous videos, this line was being drawn up in the very early 2000s, just as Marvel films were starting to burgeon in the collective consciousness. And so consequently, a lot of the characters that were chosen and the films that they were based on may seem a little surprising by 2021 standards, given the huge expansion and success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it stands today. But at the time, the release of the Fantastic Four was highly anticipated. There were hopes and expectations that this would be the new X-Men, and possibly even rival Spider-Man's success on the big screen. Of course, that's not how things went, and although the film was still successful and it spawned a sequel, it didn't set the world on fire and got a very mixed critical reception. But I can totally understand why ToyBiz thought that this would be an ideal vehicle for one of their figures in their 12-inch deluxe line. And if you're only going to produce 1 or 2 characters from the Fantastic Four, then your top contenders are going to be either The Thing or Doctor Doom. Ultimately, they went with Doctor Doom, which in hindsight probably wasn't the right choice. In fact, really, none of the characters from this film probably would have been a strong contender to be a bestseller. And whilst I think the idea of going for Doctor Doom makes perfect sense, this iteration of Doctor Doom probably isn't the one to go for. I think they would have been far better going for a comic book accurate version rather than the film version, which has ultimately led to one of the most disappointing figures in this entire line. But without further ado, let's take a look at the figure itself and see how he stands up. So here we have the packaging. Again, it is the same trapezoid shaped packaging with that very flimsy plastic outer case, which is all window display. And at the bottom there, we do have a little banner showing the film that he's from and his character logo. And interestingly, in the right hand corner, they've gone for artwork rather than a still from the film, which makes me think that maybe the final film hadn't been released when they were making this toy. Again, on the reverse, we just have that same image writ large, which I do think is very effective, and it's nice to see it in full colour. A lot of the other figures in this line usually had greyed out and you saw an image of the figure and maybe an image from the film, but this is a nice dedicated image purely to the character, although it is artistic interpretation, which is absolutely fine because I love artwork. And then underneath we have a little bit of bio, as usual. Now, out of the packaging, you can see that the figure is a little bit underwhelming, and this isn't really the fault of the figure, but it's the costume, and it's one of the many disappointing things about that film. Now, to kick off with, I think the likeness is really very good. I think this head sculpt is pretty excellent, and as we can see here, they have faithfully recaptured what that costume looks like in the film. Now, I think the shoulder pads are a little bit different. They don't seem to have those kind of that leather effect on the shoulders there, and they've gone with a more of a browny green as opposed to a quite vibrant dark green that we see in the film here. But I do really like this head sculpt. I love all the little detail in there, and I think the most successful thing is the way they've done the eyes and the skin underneath the mask there, peeping through. I think is very well done. And if we look a little bit closer and we pull that hood down, we can see that sculpting goes all the way to the back, and what's very nice is that we can actually see hair underneath the mask. So we see a little bit of extra detail here that we're not really privy to in the film. So I think this is a really cool extra little touch, and I think it's quite nicely applied. Now, whilst I'm not a huge fan of the design of this costume, I do think that ToyBiz have done a really nice job of the tailoring of it and bringing it to life. So he does have this cloak with the hood attached, but you can open it up and we can see his costume underneath. The dark red lining is quite nice, but it's not quite as flashy or as appealing as, say, the lining on the Blade 2 figure. You can take the cloak off, although why would you want to, really? Because you just see it's just a very bland costume underneath, to be honest. And frankly, it does look a little weird without the cloak. Now, the lining is actually a separate piece to which the outer cloak sort of attaches to, so it has these sort of open flaps, which I think is a quite nice approach. I think it's quite interesting visually, and I think if these were more interesting, more vibrant colours, then this might have popped a lot more than it does. As it is, it just looks a little bit drab. We can see here that he's got the belts in there, which again is a nice little touch, a little detail, which is quite well executed. And the other thing I probably would point out is that I do think all the clothing here is actually a very nice quality. It's quite a heavy cotton. It's not cheap, it's not flimsy, it feels very thick and luxurious. The boots this time around are a moulded piece. So whilst they have the virtue of being unique, they're a little bit odd. The detailing is minimal and there's not really any colour application here at all, and if you lift the leg up, you can see they're attached directly to the leg, so you can't take these shoes off, you can't really put any other clothes on him. Again, not that you particularly would want to, but it does look very, very strange. You lift that leg up there, it just looks wrong. I commend ToyBiz for trying to pull out detail wherever they can and really make the most of it. So there's little touches here like the tailoring at the bottom of his sleeves, you can see those buttons there, it's a nice little touch. And I think both the sculpt and the paint job on the hands are pretty fantastic, to be honest. In the film, Doctor Doom's metal case, his armour, is kind of coming through his skin. So I think they've done a really excellent job here of actually managing to create that effect of skin being worn away and this metal coming through on top. I think that's a harder effect to achieve, and I think they've done a really nice job of it. So you have to give them top marks for this. The only downside is that it doesn't stretch all the way up the forearm, only halfway. So again, if you pull that sleeve up, you can't afford to raise it too high before it looks a little bit off. The articulation is pretty much the same as every other figure in this line. He has a ball jointed neck, meaning he can spin his head all the way around and he can look up and down. There's naturally a little bit of hindrance from the hood because it is quite a tight hood, but it is cloth material, so you can pull it down, move it into the position you want, then pull it back up. Now he has the ball jointed shoulders, or not strictly speaking ball jointed. Now I've talked about this in other videos, but I don't think I've actually shown how strange this joint is. Hopefully now you can see what I'm talking about. The whole shoulder piece is completely missing, and what we have instead is this sort of swivel on a swivel pin, which is very odd. Now it allows for fantastic range of motion, so you can push that arm all the way back in that butterfly motion, which is fantastic, and of course it can swivel all the way up and down, so the range of motion is absolutely brilliant, but it looks very, very odd. Now it's fine with the clothes on because you really can't tell, but if you ever wanted to change the costumes around, do anything interesting with them, then you know you can't really display these figures any other way than the way they come packaged because of this. The one exception to this is Daredevil, which actually has a rubber suit placed over it, but you can check out my Daredevil video to see what I'm talking about. But what does this mean? Well, it means that Doctor Doom has fantastic range of motion in his shoulders, but also in his arms. He has a double jointed elbow and he has a swivel at the wrist. Sadly there's no hinge there, but the swivel suffices and it looks pretty good. Now he also has a ball joint in the sort of mid-chest area, meaning of course that he can swivel from side to side and arc forwards and backwards quite nicely as well. He has ball hinge hips, so of course his legs can kick out to the side, as well as forwards and backwards, and they go forwards and backwards a huge distance actually, so the range of motion here is pretty fantastic. And he also has double jointed knees, so he can kick his legs right the way back if you want, and of course he has that hinge at the ankle there, but sadly it does not swivel. And, well, that's about it, I'm afraid. He doesn't come with any accessories, but then that kind of makes sense given the character they're based on. He doesn't really have anything in the film I could think they could have given him, except maybe some, I don't know, laser effects or something like that coming from his hands, perhaps. Probably would have been a bit cheesy. Ultimately, this figure is very disappointing. This is Doctor Doom, and he's obviously such a fan favourite, and hence why I picked him up, of course, because even though I'm not a big fan of the film and don't particularly like his characterisation in it, I still love Doctor Doom. And essentially, you know, the costume might be a little bit strange, it might be a little bit drab and basic, but, you know, the key element of Doctor Doom, I suppose, is that head sculpt, and I think they have given us a fantastic head sculpt. And I think all credit to ToyBiz, because I think they've done a fantastic job with very limited means here, really, because I don't think they had a lot in terms of the source material to make the most of. So I think they've done a really good job of it, notwithstanding. But there's no escaping the fact that there's something a bit disappointing and a bit, yeah, just lackluster about this figure. He doesn't really pop in the collection. He doesn't really look really impressive on display. His costume's quite dull, but despite all that, I'm still glad to have him in the collection because I do think he's a nice figure. I think he's very well made, and the material and the texture to this figure is very, very nice. It's quite luxurious. So I think if you're on the fence, I'd probably give this one a pass, to be honest, unless either you're a huge fan of the film, madly passionate about Doctor Doom in any form, or you're a completist who wants to get the entire line. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.